everyone, guys, here, and welcome to a new video inside of Unreal Engine. Now, what we're going to be doing today is a video that I said I would do in the last video, in the Substance Painter video I did, which is sort of like a introduction to Unreal Engine for virtual production. This can be done for like an introduction for gaming or for making games, but because I do virtual production, that's where I'm going to aim it at. And basically what I'm going to be showing you is basically how to go from a scene with just an environment, and this environment's off of the Epic Games Workshop, or Fab as it's now called. Take a map that you've already got, import a character, and how to set up the materials for that character, then how to lighten the environment so you can sort of make this cinematic with a camera and just do a render with the character in this environment. So that's what the scene by default is going to look like, but I'm going to do it from scratch just to see where we get to. But again, this is good reference anyway, so I can always refer back to it if I need to. But I did do an experiment beforehand of redoing the lighting myself, and I don't think it came out too badly, personally. That's what we're going to get onto in a bit. But first things first is I want to show about importing a character and setting up the materials for said character. So what I'm going to do is, so what I've got here is I've got my clone trooper that I've made. And I'm just going to select everything, drag and drop. Now, there's two ways you can do this. You can either go the import and then find the location and select everything and then click import that way, or you can just do drag and drop. I drag and drop because I find it easier. So then you should have this window pop up. Now, there's two things that I want to change. Well, this was actually already set. So now, not everything will require this to happen, so you might have to play about with it. But with my clone troopers, because of the way they're set up, I have to set the first frame as the reference pose, because otherwise the armor won't show up for some stupid reason. I do need to troubleshoot my clones a little bit, but for the sake of me using them, I know how to get them into Unreal Engine properly anyway. So if you import a mesh that doesn't import properly, check this and it should well work. So the next thing is flip normal map green channel. Now this is another one that isn't always required. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. If you're using, let's say, assets from Halo Infinite, for example, 90% of those will require you to flip the normals. The reason why you do is because if you don't, the mesh will look strange. I'll show you an image on screen now of before and after of flip normals and not. But in my experience, you don't need to do it. I've had more instances where I don't need to do it than I do need to do it. And since my clone trooper textures are made in Substance Painter, they translate straight into Unreal Engine without the need to flip any normal maps. Right, so I'm going to leave that at blank, but and I would leave this at blank anyway, because if you happen to just set this as always import with a flipped green channel, those meshes that you don't need to flip the green channel with, then you're just going to have to go and do it manually anyway. So, but I will show you in a second how to flip the green channels individually through each of the textures. So that's all that's for this, I think. So now we just click import and it all should import into the folder as standard. Right, so that's my clone trooper imported, and as you can see, some of the textures are either just wrong or just non-existent. So we'll fix that now. That's the next point of call. Phase 2 helmet, there we go. Now, Unreal will sometimes attempt to make its own materials based off of, because this was already done in Blender. And it's been exported from Blender. Sometimes it'll try and make its own materials up. Most of the time it'll do it wrong, so you can just delete that and everything will be fine. So now what we've got is these are the helmet textures. Now, two things. First thing is go for each of the textures, and it doesn't matter whether they are from Blender, Substance Painter, directly from Unreal, or whatever. Any imported roughness maps that you have, make sure that sRGB is unchecked. Now, the reason for this, and I'll enable it just to show you what it looks like in comparison, but sRGB makes roughness maps look really, really like shiny, really very shiny, and it just doesn't look that great. And it's different from what you want the textures to look like anyway, especially if you've textured this yourself in Substance Painter. So make sure this is unchecked, but I'll show you, just for the sake of this tutorial, what it looks like when it's checked. As far as the normal map is concerned, so if you scroll down to, won't be expanded, but if you go to texture, advanced, then you've got your flip green channel checkbox there. So regardless of whether you've imported the flip green channel or you haven't, if you need to do a if you need to alter that particular setting, that's how you get to it. So let's drag and drop each of the different texture maps into here. So base color into base color, normal into normal, roughness into roughness, AO into AO, metallic set to 0, specular I'm going to do 0.8. And as you can see here, the material it doesn't look horrendous, but it's particularly shiny. It's a lot more shiny than it should be. And if I go, not into the physics asset, I don't want that, but I will go into this one. See, it doesn't look like horrendous. And if this is the look that you actually are going to go for, then by all means have it as default like that. But that's not how I textured it. Whereas if I go into sRGB, you will need to delete it and re-import it. But if I change that to the roughness, if I change the roughness texture to not use sRGB, then go back to here, it looks a lot more like what I textured it using. So you can play about with it. If it looks better with sRGB and that's the more look you're going for, then go with that. If it's not, then don't, and do it the way that I'm doing it. So there's not really any right, well, there is a right and wrong way, but it depends on what your personal preference is, shall we say. So now we can drag and drop my clone trooper into this scene here, like this. And now all of the other textures for my clone trooper and most other basic textures that are AO, base color, normal, roughness, base textures all set up the same way. So I haven't got any metallic texture, and I haven't got any, I think that's the only other one that I haven't used. But I set my metallic to 0 anyway, so all of my metallic, so I did export metallic when I exported from Substance Painter, but because all of my metallic textures are just black because they've got no value in them at all, it's just easier to set metallic to 0 in Unreal Engine. Now also, if you're using, I'm using Unreal Engine 5.5 at the moment. If you're using Unreal Engine either 5.3 and before, I think, you won't get these values next to the metallic and specular. So what you do instead is if you drag off and you go constant, it will make a constant. You can set the value there. And the same goes for specular as well. So, but now I'm using Unreal Engine 5.5, I get these values that I can change in the main material node anyway, so I don't need to worry about that. So now that my clone trooper's in the world properly and I've got the helmet texture set up, when I come to actually doing like the final product, I will set it all up, the rest of it all up, but I don't want to waste time doing it now when you know it's exactly the same process from the helmet to the rest of the body. Next thing I want to do is we want to do lighting. So if we go into lit mode, I want to go into lights, and first of all let's add a directional light and stick that there, and then we want a skylight like this. Don't want a sun sky, we want a sky atmosphere, so check a sky atmosphere in here, and we also want a exponential height fog as well. To make life easier, you can go into this, if you go into ENV Light Mixer, I think it's up here in this window, so yeah, if you check ENV Light Mixer, you can, there is a set of buttons you can just press and import it into your world automatically without you having to go manually search for everything. However, the problem is that because I've already got it, all those elements in this lighting folder here, it won't show up here because it's technically already still in the world. So that's why I've got to do it manually. Let me just get all of these different elements and the sphere effect capture, put them into new lighting like that. Now first of all, let's just maneuver this directional light so it's in a bit more of a like nicer type like position. So I think maybe like that, possibly. That might work. Oh, that's even better. There we go. You can alter this later, but just to get a basic feel. So we've got the light coming down here, which will probably lead to the helping with the light shafts, and then just sort of, and then like that. I think that looks alright for the time being. We can alter it later on, but just for the sake of now. Also, I'm going to change all of my lights to movable. The only reason why I'm doing that is because it just makes life easy. It means I don't have to, it says light needs to be baked, but it doesn't make that much difference. I tested it earlier. When you've got static or stationary lights, every time you move one of the lights, you've got to rebake your lighting, whereas movable sets it to dynamic, so it will update in real time. It uses more performance, but it doesn't take, but it means you don't have to wait for the lighting to bake every single time. That's the directional light. I'm going to leave the intensity as it is for the moment. We can change it later on if we need to. So let's go into my skylight, set this to real time, set the QMAP resolution to 512, sky distance threshold to 1, and then we're going to go and set the intensity something like 10. Now what that does is that, so the skylight, so directional light is obviously your sunlight. but the skylight is basically your ambient light. And what I mean by ambient light is if I disable it, if I turn off effects world, you see that all of these darker areas suddenly lose all their light. And so it's basically just to brighten up the shadows a little bit. I can turn the intensity up a lot, so it washes out everything. And you can even set it right up to the top, so it's like even under here, these little dark crevices here, they start getting a bit of skylight. But you don't need an awful lot of skylight. But the difference between the two, it does just brightens up these little dark shadows a little bit. Really, even setting it to 20 might well be a bit better, but I'm going to set it to 10 because I think that's what looks best in this environment. I'm using real-time capture because I want the source of the skylight to capture the actual scene itself. So everything around it is being captured by that skylight, and then it's using that to feed lighting information for the shadows. If this isn't working, you don't want that. What you can do is if you uncheck real time and then go to specified cube map, you can choose from one of all of these different cube maps that's already built into Unreal Engine. If you can't see them, you need to go to it's either show developer or show engine content, and then the rest of them will pop up. But if I, let's say, let's say, like, I don't know, this one, for example, suddenly it's a lot brighter. HDRI that's in this skylight is using light and information from that to light up this scene, which it might well be what you want, but for me, it's not the sort of thing I want to capture the light to make it look as realistic to the scene that's around it as possible. Like, that doesn't look horrendous, and even if like I could turn it up a bit, but it just doesn't look that great for the scene that we're making. The only time that I ever use a specified cube map is if I'm making a space environment, because there's not an awful lot of light in the environment anyway. So I use like a space environment, like HDRI, and then just bump the brightness up with a bit of like a color tweak. But for something like this, I like using captured scene with real time will do the job pretty much perfectly. Again, it's up to your own. It depends on what aesthetic you want to go for. If that's the aesthetic you want to go for, by all means. If it's not, then try something a little bit different. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to do it how I think that I would like it to look. So that's a skylight. So next what I want to do is I want to go into my exponential height fog and turn on volumetric fog. Now, automatically, that then changes the fog from what it was beforehand through like a bluey colour to more like a orangey, musky colour, which is much more better for the scene that we're making. And what you can do to make it look even better is if you go back into your directional light, if you set the volumetric scattering intensity to 5, it then produces this really nice God ray. Now, it doesn't always, it depends on how your scene's set up, but because of like this whole, like, you've got gaps in the wall over here, and with it all like stony overhang, it makes some really nice God rays. What it does, if nothing else, is it just makes the fog a lot more intense. And fog is nice because it sort of adds depth to the scene a little bit. Like if I could do this for the skylight as well. It doesn't affect it hugely, but it does just a little bit. But if I get rid of the exponential height fog, you can see, A1, it lights up the scene a lot more, but also it just makes the scene, without it, the scene just looks really flat. And I've noticed just adding like a height fog in, just so like, let's see, when I'm making Traitor 3, the corridor, Star Destroyer corridor that I'm making scenes for, you look at it and you think, it looks all right as it is, but the second you add an exponential height fog in, and set it to volumetric and just bump it up just a little bit, that alongside adding a bit of fog with the spotlights over top, it changes the look of the scene dramatically. Honestly, it's unbelievable how much different your scene can look with a exponential height fog. So that's the exponential height fog. Now what I'm also going to do is I'm going to go into my directional light and I'm going to set the indirect lighting intensity to 5 automatically. Now what indirect light intensity is the amount of times the light can bounce. So if I set it to 1, it darkens the scene a lot because the scene is only bouncing once. So whereas if I change it to 5, suddenly the light can bounce all around everywhere and it brightens the scene up an awful lot more. Now I can change it to like 10 and it'll brighten it up, or like 50 and it'll really brighten it up But the problem is that if you set it too high, it looks really washed out. 5, it tends to be the sweet spot for me. I've never really, sometimes I'll lower it to maybe like 4 possibly, but I've never really had a situation where I need it to be any higher than, really like, I've never had it higher than 5 in most cases, and even in those individual cases, I've never had it any more above 8. So, but 5 generally is a sweet spot for me. Volumetric scattering intensity, you can turn that up as much as you want your fog, the exponential height fog, to affect the scene. So it's like, if you want, let's say, like, if I put a spotlight in here, let's say, and I just, let's say I want this clone trooper, I've got a really dark scene. So let's say I've got, let's just turn this, put the light in like that, and I've got this spotlight fog, and I'll let's say turn the inner cone, turn the intensity up a bit so it's lit, so it lights him up a bit. And if I just disable this for the moment, and if I want, let's say, like a really like deep fog around my clone trooper, set that to 5, set the indirect light intensity a bit more. But if I set this to 5, spotlight to 5, and change it to movable quickly as well, you can't really see it that well. It's there, you can see there's a little bit of fog here and around here, but it's not very strong. But whereas you can change this, say something like 500, and suddenly it's all blown out, you've got this massive fog. So you can, and suddenly it's sort of light, it's lit up. This is way too strong, but it's very useful for, if I just change, let's say like 10, you do need to play about with things a little bit, because it's like because then you see the fog sort of cut off a little bit. You want it to fade a bit more. Then suddenly it looks, you've got this like really bright fog from this spotlight here. I can change it probably down to like maybe like 30, maybe 20. And to be fair, that doesn't look too bad if that's the sort of look you're going for. But you can use the exponential height fog for multiple things, not in just your directional light, but you can increase the intensity an awful lot as well. Currently I've got the volumetric intensity to 5. I could change it to 20, and suddenly you've got these really deep god rays, really bright god rays, without it changing the intensity at all. Like I can change the intensity to 20 and it'll brighten up even more. But the problem is though, is that like if you set it to, again, 5 seems to be the sweet spot here. I can maybe change it to like 8 and bring it bright up a little bit, maybe even 10. Still looks quite good, but anything higher than that just looks really washed out. That doesn't look too bad to me. Also, something else that I forgot to do, which I should have done right at the start, and I'm an idiot for not doing it. First thing before we do anything else, I know this is stupid because I'm barely put this right now when I should have put it earlier on. It doesn't matter doing it now. Make sure you have a post-process volume and make sure it's set to unbound. So then everything you do inside this post-process volume will affect everything in the scene and not just what's inside the little cube. For something like this scene, it wouldn't matter too much because you can just expand it to fit the scene, but why waste the effort when you can just like search up unbound and check a box? Next thing I want to in post-process volume is I want to check metering, check exposure compensation, and check physical camera, turn that off, and then set the min and max EV value to 1. Now what this does is this turns off auto exposure. So if I turn this back on, the different areas that I move, you can sort of see the lighting changes. So if I go all the way up here, the lighting changes a bit. If I go down here, it changes a bit more. It's not horrendous. It's a bit annoying, right? So you could go to different parts and the lighting will look weird. Whereas if I turn off auto exposure by setting both these values to 1, no matter where I go, the lighting is exactly the same. The reason why you should do this first is because, as you can see from this scene here, it's dramatically changed what the scene looks like. So what I can actually do now is I can change the light intensity to, let's say, 20 to brighten it up back to where it was. I can even probably turn the ambient light up to 20 as well, just to add that little bit of extra. And possibly I could even turn the volumetric scattering to 10 just to brighten up. Actually, no, I don't like that. Change to 8, and then you've got pretty much the scene back to where it should be. I can maybe even turn the indirect lighting up to 8 as well, just to brighten up just a little bit more. I think that's pretty much it in regards to lighting. There's not, you can do other things, like if I turn this off and turn this back on, so you can add other things. Like if you want to add, like, let's say, like you can add your own sort of like god ray sort of thing up here if you wanted to. You can add, you know, maybe like add a spotlight and have this really deep sort of volumetric shadow coming from this top. I'm pointing at the screen, you can't see me pointing at the screen, but this bit here, you can maybe add like a spotlight and have like sort of like a fog coming through. Maybe, depends, again, a lot of it just depends on your creativity and how far you want it to go. This I think looks pretty good for me. Okay, so let's say that's exactly what you want your lighting to look like. In this case, for me, it is going to be the case. now we can go and set up a cinematic. So if you go cinematics, go back into your content browser, go where you want to make the file, right click cinematics and then level sequence, and we'll call it something like ruins cinematic or something like that. There we go. Double click to open it, and then we want to add a cinematic camera actor, and then go add actor to sequencer, add cinematic camera. By default, it'll be set to 16:9. I don't particularly like 16:9 for cinematics, so I'm going to change it to 21:9, and then I'm going to change the focal length to just like to 10, just for the sake, just for now, just so I can position it up correctly. Something I really love with cinematics is I really love the 85mm lens as my little sweet spot. But the problem is that it looks really high quality, but because this room is so small, an 85mm lens just doesn't work. It's just not going to happen. As you can see, I said an 85mm lens. It looks really nice up close. If we go up to my clone trooper, you can see his face. And my clone trooper looks really good with an 85mm lens, but the rest of it doesn't look that great. I'm going to change this to, let's say, like a 20mm lens, right? So now I can see, I even think that's a bit too much. 15mm lens, and you can see you've got a large scope of the scene. And if I change this to, let's say, cinematic, for example, that could do good for a quite nice render. Obviously, get rid of my clone trooper. I can actually probably set the clone trooper up the top, but I probably don't actually even need to be there, to be fair. So I get rid of that. That's in cinematic mode. Add your preset to, or make up your preset for movie render queue, and that would be a good render, I think, personally. So that's about all I have time for in this video here, just to show you how to set up for cinematics. Because what you can do from here is you track your camera, you can add actors, you can add animations, maybe add a bit of VFX or something. But from this point, if you want to just render a still image, this is how you render it. You can go into your movie render queue here, make your own output of whatever it happens to be that you want, and then you hit render, and that'll render that image or sequence depending on what you want. But this is how you set up a scene for cinematics. This would be something that I'd be more than happy to make a cinematic in whatever it happens to be. I might tweak things a little bit, but I don't think that this scene looks particularly that bad, honestly. I'll probably actually, instead of having the camera over there, I'd probably have the camera sort of like over here. Again, I probably would change the focal length to 10 maybe, just to encapsulate everything in all of its glory, because everything's so grand and big. That's pretty much what I've got. I would be happy to make a cinematic in with this lighting, with maybe some slight tweaks, maybe to the camera angle, the lighting angle, and maybe the God ray, maybe possibly make that a little bit stronger. But also something you've got to remember: camera actors are a little bit different to different things to post-processing volumes. So make sure you set your auto exposure off in your camera actor as well, because it may well cause some issues between what's in your engine editor and what's in your camera. That's pretty much all I've got time for in this video here. I'd like to thank you all very much for watching. If you did enjoy, don't forget to smash that like button, hit that subscribe button for more awesome tutorial YouTube type content. If you have any questions, leave in the comment section down below, and I'll try and answer them as best as I can. So hope you guys have enjoyed. I shall see you all later. Bye.